Sheridan AV. This presentation will look into Sheridan AV, an audio-visual company with an aim to provide the ultimate in sound and vision for your perfect home cinema system. As a result of David Sheridan wanting to list the company on the stock exchange, we have conducted a review of the control environment and are presenting our findings, recommendations, and conclusions based on 6 key elements.
Our first key element is information systems, and related to this, the first key breach in ethics is that of professional behaviour. Rosie demonstrates a severe lack of professional behaviour for the poor condition she leaves accounts in. A prime example is how she refers to the management accounts looking like the back of a cigarette packet. Moving on, there is a threat to independence, that being self-review. The main relevance is for the judgment of how needed a new computer system is. As if not as necessary as perceived, then the judgment should be re-evaluated. The risk in the control environment is potential material misstatement because of the poor documentation, since they aren't presented formally or in a uniform way. We classify the risk as a control risk as it is because of the internal control procedures not being in place for proper documentation. There is a risk of material misstatement not being prevented or detected. Presentation is a relevant assertion because some accounts aren't presented properly and some, like the bonus scheme proposal, aren't presented at all. The suggested audit procedure is external confirmation. To assess if presentation needs to be changed, and if so, then re-performance needs to occur so that all documents are presented accordingly to requirements. The second element is communication, where yet again professional behaviour is principal ethic at breach. This is due to communication not occurring via emails or recordable phone calls, but in-person conversations which are not recorded. Also, since there is an inability to currently oversee communications, confidentiality is an ethic at potential breach. The current communication system allows for a threat of independence via intimidation. This is because potential intimidation occurring can't be overseen since there is no recording of conversations and emails aren't regularly used. The current risk is potential misstatement of facts from conversations. This is an inherent risk as there are no internal control procedures to prevent or detect a mistake. The relevant assertion is completeness, as events aren't being recorded since there is no intercom system, and the recommended audit procedure to mitigate this risk is observation. Having the ability to observe communication, such as via an intercom system, can mitigate priorly mentioned risks.
When it comes to Sheridan AV as a company, Sheridan AV lacks integrity as shown by Rosie Hendricks' attitude with Graham Moore. She complains that the auditor is causing a lot of work and stress. She feels that the audit is turning a small friendly pace into a bureaucratic nightmare. Sheridan AV as a whole seems uncooperative with the audit due to having no formal documentation, using the small company size as an excuse. Therefore, they're not being straightforward or honest in a professional capacity, unable to clearly disassociate themselves from information that may contain false statements. In addition, the threat to independence to the auditor could be intimidation. Rosie Hendricks is indirectly depriving the auditor of basic needs to carry out the audit, as well as criticizing. The auditor could be deterred from acting objectively due to the negative feedback from the company. For example, if the company feels upset with the audit, they could drop out as a client to Alex Gold, which would not be in the auditor's interest. Therefore, the auditor may create a report that appeases Sheridan AV, losing their integrity and behaving unprofessionally. Thus, the risk from this is that the auditor will compromise their morals and their report will contain misstatements so as to pacify Sheridan AV. Regarding the internal control system of an organization, this threat of intimidation can be viewed both as an inherent risk and a control risk. It is an inherent risk since it could happen regardless of how effectively the control environment is performing. Yet, it could also be a control risk if a company's control environment is not made to effectively stop, spot, and deal with intimidation incidents. It would be the completeness assertion that would be relevant, because intimidation may cause auditors to omit or suppress material information from the financial statements, resulting in incomplete records. So what can the auditor do to mitigate this risk? Well, the auditor can document and communicate any issues related to intimidation or other threats to independence that arise during the audit engagement. This could include documenting any attempts by management or others to coerce or influence the auditor's work, as well as any instances of uncooperation. They could also seek guidance from regulatory bodies to ensure that they are following the appropriate ethical standards to ensure that objectivity is not compromised.
The principles of ethics at breach within the management at Sheridan AV are self-interest threat and intimidation threat. The board of directors are made up entirely of David Sheridan's friends and family, meaning they may choose to act in their own self-interest and not oppose each other in regards to decision-making. This ensures their job security and avoids conflict. This may also be considered an intimidation threat. the perceived threat of exclusion from the bonus scheme or removal from the board if conflict arises. This is a threat to independence, as management are unable to speak objectively from fear of friction. The board also have no formal training for their roles, as required by the UK Code of Corporate Governance, and have implemented no training for employees. This may be due to the election of directors by David himself as the majority shareholder, electing those he has a good relationship with rather than those who are suitable to be director. The inability to speak objectively affects independence during the audit procedure. There is a risk with the lack of training that the information provided may not have been completed correctly, as seen with Rosie Hendricks' failure to produce a set of formal financial statements. This risk should be classified as an inherent risk, as management are not qualified to perform the tasks relevant to the audit procedure and have not trained employees to complete said tasks. The assertion relevant here is accuracy of information. There is a risk that the lack of training by employees will lead to inaccurate information which does not reflect Sheridan AV's actual performance. The auditor should apply their professional skepticism when inspecting financial information. This will allow the auditor to recognise errors or overstated values which may lead to material misstatements.
Sheridan AV's allocation of authority and responsibility was not reasonable. There was not enough segregation of duties, and this weakens the internal control system. Rosie had too much control over the organization in her role as account manager. Rosie was overwhelmed by the responsibility and she had been given. Firstly, she was involved in two separate departments, finance, accounting, and human resources. This makes the potential misstatement of information possible to understand the extent of the potential consequences. I suggest conducting an exercise and asking Rosie to demonstrate the process she goes through when preparing a payroll or when asked to bring the new employee to see how effective the internal process are. In addition, she has the ability to approve and sign document, which is another huge responsibility. The problem is that because she is involved in two departments, there's a potential for fraud. If management set unrealistic target as what the account manager was to achieve, this could lead to manipulation of figures in the finance statement using her signature. This is known as imitation threat, which is an inherent risk because of the potential for fraud. Not only Rosie, but David saw Martin also create a threat to independence by profiting for himself through his own rights. From the information we gathered about the management from some of the minutes of meeting and telephone interviews, we can surmise that there are potential problems with many people having too much power without the corresponding responsibility, and some junior staff have too much responsibility without the corresponding power. We recommend that Sheridan AV hire professionals and replace existing management and redistribute rights and responsibilities to balance the workload of the staff. In terms of HR policies and practices, Sheridan AV has no formal HR department, as all the allocation and management of positions is handled directly through David and Rosie. Through this picture, we can see that almost all management have close private contact, and their appointments position are most likely through formal selection, but through personal relationships, as also verified in Margaret's interview. This information appointment violates the ethical principles of professional competence, and almost all the employees and management are appointed to their respective position without formal education and training, which is contrary to objective and fairness. Information selection and recruitment process do not support effective internal structural controls, and Sheridan AV should establish a formal HR department to address this set of issues.
In conclusion, we've assessed and recommended that Sheridan AV Limited ensure ethical standards are followed with guidance from regulatory bodies, plan and perform this audit with professional skepticism, establish an HR department and participation decision making, improve communication system for recording and the accounts documentation approach, reassess potential threats to independence, and take these audit recommendations to rectify internally. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching.